Well, as you all know, we don't have class today due to the weather, and maybe that's just fine. So I'm just going to record something to talk to everybody about Chapter 10. So Chapter 9 stuff is due today. Hopefully you've got that uploaded, and if you did it on hand, you can just give it to me tomorrow. That'd be just fine. You can slide underneath my door if I'm not there, but otherwise you can just turn it in manually, and that'll be just fine. And then I want to remind everybody that test 3 is due Sunday night, the 14th. I was going to make sure everybody remembered that today in class, but here's your reminder. Due Sunday night over chapter 7, 8, and 9. It's an online test within my.usf. We've taken, I think the first test we did was just like that. So it's timed. I forget how many questions there are. I forgot to look. But it's very similar to the first test that you guys did. And then just make sure you're updating your business atmosphere tracking. We don't have one due for a couple of weeks yet, but I just want to make sure that you're on board to get that done. And then next week I've got chapter 10 items due along with the valuation assignment. So those are kind of the big reminders that I was going to mention this week was just assignments. So the valuation assignment, I showed that to you in class, I think it was last week. You download the attached document right here and follow the instructions. And then once you're done, you upload it. So just follow the directions. That's all you got to do. It's mostly just doing different ways to value a stock. Choose a stock of a company that's been around for a while and that does pay a dividend. Otherwise, it'll be hard to do. And I kind of mentioned that right here. So stable or larger company, stable earnings does pay a dividend. Okay, if you don't have those things, it's a little bit tougher to do. And then what you'll want to do is kind of once you go through this on the website, you'll want to double check and just kind of do screenshots and save your screenshots. So you can use either print screen or snipping tool. I like snipping tool. Most computers have it. If you don't know for sure, just do a little search in the bottom left of your, if you've got a Windows computer, in the bottom left, you do a search on snipping tool, and I think on a Mac it's towards the upper right where you do a search. If you don't have it on your computer, you probably could download it or do a print screen. But our desktop computers on campus in the computer lab would have it too, so you can just sit there and do it in one of those labs too. And the assignment maybe takes an hour at the top side. So, but once you go through everything, then I want you to answer some questions. So you're going to be answering those questions right here. You can just type in your answers right after the question and just upload the same document. You can put your print screens or snips on the same document if you want to also. So it's kind of fun. It's kind of interesting to see how different stocks are valued and what the different valuation models are. And the whole point was just kind of have some fun with it. And you just know no method's perfect, right? There's lots of methods to do it. That's kind of one of the big takeaways. So just have fun with that assignment. I think you'll enjoy it. And then the other assignments are kind of the normal ones, a problem, questions, and the quiz. So the problems deal with calculating returns. So the whole chapter is about returns, and I'm going to come back and show you a little trick also. So just big picture, the chapter talks about indexes. It talks about different ways to calculate an average, price-weighted, value-weighted, and geometric. Those are all the three ways. And the slides do a pretty good job of giving you some pretty basic examples. And of course, the chapter gives you some that are a bit more detailed than this one. But obviously, this is a price-weighted average, 10 plus 20 divided by 2 is 15. The two values of these stocks, and that's a dollar sign of 2, but that really should just be the number 2. Is $15. And evaluates, you're weighting your portfolio based on the number of shares outstanding, which is obviously going to be a little bit more accurate than just this one right here, because this takes into account the fact that for stock A it's 1,000 shares worth 10 million, and stock B is 10 million shares worth $200 million. And that's going to now we get a little bit better weighting. So it's 210,000 divided by 1,010,000 shares, or 11 million shares, if I can do the math right in my head. So, there's no right or wrong way. Geometric average is probably the most accurate way of doing it also. Taking 1 divided by the n, the reciprocal of n, So for two stocks, that's 0.5. And then averages and indexes, they give us quite a bit of information in the chapter about these. The whole point with them is to see how stocks have performance has changed over time. There's all kinds of indexes out there and averages, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the S&P index, there's all kinds. And the chapter goes through examples of a lot of them for us. They're not all calculated the same way. That's one big thing to keep in mind. So they're all a little bit different. So you can't compare one to the other and do apples to apples. You have to just take one average, compare it over a long range of time to apples to apples. But most indexes generally, even if they're calculated different ways, will generally travel up and down the same direction. So that's one thing to keep in mind too. So the Dow Jones Industrial is probably the one most people are aware of, the DJIA, Dow Jones Industrial Average. It's literally the 30 biggest firms in the country that trade on the U.S. stock exchanges. So it's kind of that one that's always been around for a long time, kind of the first one. And this is the Dow Jones since 1950. So pretty insane. Look at how the stock market dramatically increased in the 90s. Guess what? When things got on the internet. Go figure, right? So just look at that. And those long lines are how much it changed in a year. So kind of notice pre-technology, stocks didn't go up and down a lot in a given year. But then take a look at once we kind of got into technology and see how much a market can change in 1 year. And you can see what the value is and how much that's changed. So it just kind of gives you a feel for how things have changed from what they used to be. And that's what that price movement graph was that we just got done looking at. This kind of shows us how in one given year, the longer that vertical line is, the more the market changed that year. And then over here, you've got 2008. Okay, that's what this bad one is here. And 2009 wasn't much better. It came back a little bit, thankfully. Remember that the market crashed in 8 and 9. It didn't come back until 11. Okay, so now this shows right pre-crash how high it was. It wasn't until 11 that it came back. Okay, and this shows us just examples of price movement graphs. Now, the thing about this, the point of this slide is to show us that the scale matters, right? This one goes 5 to 25, so the numbers are bigger. This one goes 5 to 80, so the numbers are smaller. And so you have to be really careful because this looks like it's bigger changes until I move it over here and I go, oh, because the same numbers, just a different scale, and now they look really different. So you have to really be careful to the scale. And then this is price movement graphs then using a different scale. Okay, so the book goes through, it talks about a whole bunch of different indexes. You've got some very specialized indexes, and with the advent of technology, it's easier to create more indexes now. So there are several indexes now. Okay, and those are just some more examples too. Okay, and so they can cover a sector, a subsection of the market, foreign markets. However, no matter how many there are, though, I've already kind of mentioned that they move together and they're correlated, and this proves it. So they did the Standard & Poor's, the S&P 500. They did the Dow Jones. They did the New York Stock Exchange Composite. So you can see here, this is from 1980 till, I want to say 2010 maybe is when the last year was on this particular slide. And you can see how correlated they are. You can look at some years there might, they didn't move the same direction, but over time they generally move the same direction. And the S&P 500 has the highest return, but also keep in mind this takes into account a lot of smaller stocks, which typically have higher returns. The blue chips, the really big stocks, they're in the New York Stock Exchange and the Dow Jones, and their returns typically aren't as great. They're less risky. They're safer bets, so they don't have the bigger returns necessarily. Okay, and then volatility index. The book talks about that a little bit. Just kind of, they call it a fear index. Rises during periods of volatility. So the more volatility there is, the more that will go up and down. And then the chapter also talks about what they call the HPR, or holding period return. And a lot of your homework for this particular week will be to calculate these. So P1 is the price of a stock in a year. D, dividend today. P0 is the price of the stock today. So the holding period return on a stock. If you bought it for 46 today, and then at some point in time it's worth 50, and you received a $2 dividend, you received a 30% return. Now, the one thing about the HPR, it's good to know what my return was, but it does not take into account time. Okay, it does not consider length of time. 1 year and 10 years are the same with the formula. So it's still a good formula, but it has a kind of that weakness. So there are other methods to calculate what returns are. Rate of return, for example, measuring cash outflow with cash inflows generated, giving an annualized compound return, or dollar-weighted average return. So this one's called the internal rate of return, and this is saying the price of a stock should be all the dividends in the future divided 1 plus some interest rate, and then we have to solve for R in that particular example. And we do that, and we get the rate of return in this example be 14. So Excel can do this for us. I'm going to show you guys that, which is kind of nice. Now, internal rate of return, again, isn't necessarily perfect either. Assumes cash flows are reinvested at the internal rate of return, which is not always exactly an assumption that will hold true. And so to fix that, they use potentially the time-weighted return average, which kind of fixes that a little bit and is probably a little bit more accurate. So investment returns then, you can see here they calculated some stocks. They went with large caps, so the really big companies, what their returns were these different periods of time. So 2005 to 14 takes into account the stock market crash of 2008 and 9. And this is volatility. Well, this shows us, now this is before 2008, but this does bring into play the volatility from 9/11, 2001, and the internet bubble popping. So you can kind of see for the OTC stocks, that's where the internet stocks were. They weren't big enough yet to be on the S&P 500. So you can see the volatility of the over-the-counter market was way different than it was for the S&P 500. And then the book talks about a really good strategy called dollar cost averaging. And let's just say you own a stock and your stock price keeps coming down, and that you can average that down, and you're okay buying more shares of your stock when it comes down in value because you're kind of buying it on sale more or less, and you're bringing your average down. But you would only do that if you believe the drop is temporary, and temporary thinking, a year or so, and that eventually a stock will come back up. So that would be the premise for averaging down. If I was a big investor in Boeing, I might be, doing that strategy, just thinking, okay, they're going through some bad times, and so I'll just keep buying them right now as the stock keeps coming down, knowing that eventually things will turn around, they'll right the ship, and things will go back up again. So averaging down is just a strategy that the chapter mentions. And then in the problems, what I want you guys to do on your own, and this is what I was going to tell you to do in class, is on page 397. They've got fundamental problems with work solutions, and there's 3 of those, 1, 2, and 3. And you should work those and then check the answers, which are on the next page, on page 398. I think that will help you tremendously. But I want to do the first one together because it involves time value of money computation, and I want to show you how to do that. So the first question deals with, you buy a stock for 60 and you sell it for 90 after 5 years. What is the holding period return, average percent return, and the annualized compound rate of return? So I'm going to show you how to do that. You can obviously look at it in the book and figure it out, but I've got an Excel file that'll do the time value of money piece for you. So let's go into our class, and if we go back to main page, so I'm just going to main page, and then go down to handouts. And then where it says there's an Excel file called, let's see, this might be the wrong, no, this is 405. This is right here, PV and FV formulas. That's the one right there. I've already got it open, but I guess I'll open it again. PV and FV formulas is this file right here. Okay, and I want you to take a look at the section where it says solve for I, solve for interest rate right here. And so the question, I just kind of read it, but it's on page 397, and it is question 1 on page 397 of Fundamental Problems of Work Solutions. So we're going to buy a stock for 60. That's our purchase price. We're going to sell it for 90 in 3 years. So obviously, in 5 years. So obviously it goes up in price by $30. And this is over a 5-year period. And so one of the questions is, what is the holding period return? Well, the holding period return is the gain of 30 divided by the initial purchase price of 60. So if you take 30 divided by 60, everybody can do the mental math on that. It's 50%. Okay, that's the holding period return. Then the average return is to take that 50% and divide it by 5 years. So 50% divided by 5, we all know, is 10% per year. So 0.1 or 10% per year. Then the last question is, what is the annualized compound return? So this one takes into account the time value of money. So what you have to do is take the present value, the fact that the stock sold, where we bought it for 60, and the future value is what we bought it for 60 and we sell it for 90, the future value. So we buy it, imagine we're buying it today for 60, and then in 5 years we sell it for 90. So the N becomes 5, and that calculates the return of 8.45. So this is the the rate formula. Let me double click on this so you can see it, the rate formula. So this takes into account the time value of money. So the holding period return is 50%. The average annual return is 10%. The compound return, which takes into account time value of money, is 8.45. So that's the one that's the most accurate, is the 8.45. So I just wanted you to know how to do that, so you can do the same kind of thing for the problems that I assigned to you, because you have to compute the annual rate of return, and you have to compute that. So without that Excel file, you can still do it without this Excel file, but it's just easier. Okay, so if you guys have questions about that, just let me know, but then hopefully we will be able to meet next week. Thanks.